Hello, Vicki Baran here. This presentation is meant for teachers like myself in an educational setting. So this can apply to my fellow colleagues, and I'm going to be discussing how to apply cognitive learning processes in an educational setting, specifically in terms of students and forgetting. I'm sure forgetting is something we have all experienced at some point. However, this can be something that is very impactful in an educational setting. It really will affect if a teacher can move on to the next topic, and this can really impact pacing of curriculum. So in this presentation, I have some tips for increasing student memory retrieval, so retrieving things out of long-term memory, and also tips for decreasing forgetting, especially from forgetting can be from year to year for students, or it can simply be something that's forgetting that's occurring over a long break or even day to day. So what are some tips that can help increase student retention of material? So before I get to that, I want to discuss what forgetting is. So first of all, what is it and why do students forget? So forgetting is when information that has been either one, lost from long-term memory. So long-term memory, that is our permanent type of memory. It has, as far as we know, an unlimited capacity. So either information is permanently lost from the long-term memory, or that information is in long-term memory, but we cannot retrieve it. We cannot access it. So what are some reasons for why students forget? Either that information has been lost or they're having trouble retrieving it. So one can be interference. So interference can be, let's say students are learning a topic, they learn about that topic, great, and then you move on and you're like, okay, well, here's some exceptions to that topic or to that rule, that skill that we just talked about. And that can cause some interference, some confusion. Maybe students are having trouble recalling the original information they learned because they are so focused on those exceptions. And this can also occur when learning a new skill, and maybe an old skill is interfering with that. Students learn a skill and then they move on, they learn another maybe similar skill, and they're having trouble remembering that previous old skill, or there's some interference with what they're currently learning. So kind of like their hair's getting crossed, so to speak. Information could also still be in long-term memory, but we're having trouble retrieving it due to lack of cues. I know I've seen this in my students personally. Usually I have to if I refer to a certain situation that I talked about in class, a specific example, I mention a key word, that will usually be a good enough cue for students to remember whatever it is that we are currently talking about. If it's something that they learned, maybe a while ago, sometimes you have to use certain cues to kind of jog the memory, so to speak. And then lastly, the strength of the original message. So when students first learned that information and they learned it, they stored it in their long-term memory, how strong was that encoded information? And some things that can affect that are the meaningfulness of that material, the elaboration of that material, and the organization of that material. So meaningful, was the student able to relate to it? That usually will increase the strength of that message if it's something that's impactful to the student. Elaboration, how detailed was that information? Can it be related to some real-world examples? And then lastly, organization. This actually can, an example of this is related to what we call spreading activation. So We can link certain topics together in long-term memory. So if we forget something, if we have multiple links going to that, we can, if we forget one, maybe we'll remember the other, and we can still retrieve that specific piece of information. So depending on how information is organized in long-term memory can also impact how it is going to be retrieved. So here's some tips for encoding that originally learned material in long-term memory. How can we strengthen that? And then also minimizing forgetting. So I'm going to discuss those three things I just mentioned: meaningfulness, elaboration, and organization. So how meaningful was the information that was first learned? Oops. How meaningful was that? So is this something that the students can relate to? And believe it or not, this can actually save time. So taking the time to create some meaningful experience for students can actually save a lot of time for the teacher in terms of not having to rehearse that material as much. So to create something that's meaningful or impactful for students, you can relate it to the student's own life, to the real world, something that is tangible for them to connect with. And maybe it's some type of experience. Maybe it can be, it's a kind of an extreme, but maybe going and taking a field trip, getting some real world tangible connection can mean a lot for students. And this is very important because, especially as myself as a high school teacher, it's really important to take those abstract ideas that we talk about in the classroom that might be in a textbook and making them relatable, making them real world, maybe using an analogy of some sort, however silly and goofy that it might be. That's going to be something that can stick with students. The next piece that's important to help with that original encoding process is the elaboration. When that material was first learned, was it detailed? Did it include those real world examples? Were there connections? Sometimes as teachers, we assume, especially as a high school teacher, we assume that students can make the connection between two things, and we assume that they know what the connection is. However, we can't always assume that. It's very important to make very explicit connections amongst the material and not just assuming that students are going to be able to make the connection on their own. And then not only linking different topics together, material to one another, but also linking new and old material, linking what students maybe have previously learned to what they are currently learning, making those connections so we can decrease that interference, so we can decrease any crosshairs or confusion between the old and the new material. And then we also have organization. So again, going back to linking that material. So linking information together to hopefully increase that spreading activation. So if a student forgets maybe a piece of material, if they have multiple connections going to it, kind of like a concept map, then they're better able to, if they can remember that one piece, then hopefully that will jog their memory to remember the rest of the linked pieces. So this can be done with concept maps, so having students create those. And what's important is, obviously as a teacher, you can model how to create a concept map, but what's going to be more impactful for the student is having them create their own organization. Maybe that is during a lesson, having them create a concept map or some type of outline of or to organize the material. It could maybe be at the end of a unit, right before you're going to review before a test. Have the students create their own organization, because that's going to be a lot more meaningful and impactful for them, and will give them the ability to organize themselves how they see fit the information that they learned. And then my last tip, which can help, especially between long breaks, maybe it's spring break, maybe it's winter break, maybe it's a 3-day, 4-day weekend, Thanksgiving break, and you're doing your lesson plans and you really can't line up, break up a unit so that you can end a unit and start a new unit, or a topic between breaks. Something that you can do as a teacher is create some fun assignment during that break. Create something that students will enjoy doing. So an example can be, which is something that I learned from this current master's course, is making a connection between the material and the student's life. So maybe assign students, hey, make some connection between what we've been doing in class and the real world or your personal life. Maybe have students just do a little short paragraph about it. Maybe have them make a Flipgrid video, something that's still meaningful but not super lengthy, because then students probably won't be likely to do it then if it's gonna be super time consuming. So instead of making things, super lengthy and having students rehearse the same thing maybe multiple times, instead maybe create a more meaningful experience that's fun. Maybe have students share what they made connections between on a collaboration platform so other students can see those connections that were made amongst their peers. Maybe have students comment on each other's connections that they made. So something that's fun, maybe even like, like a scavenger hunt of some sort, or something that will get students excited to engage with the material. So those are just a few tips to help minimize forgetting and increase student encoding in the first place in an educational setting. And then here's my source, and thank you for watching.